They lived in squares, painted in circles, and loved in triangles. This clever description by the great Dorothy Parker.
I was going to click your slides.
You're going to click my slides?
If you want, yeah.
Well, okay, that's fine. You click.
Okay.
I'm entrusting
You ready
you.
for me to click it?
Yes, because you want me to go fast. Yes.
That
This
is such a
clever
lie.
description by the great Dorothy Parker is a beautiful way to open our literature program this morning, and today's topic is stellar salons. Good morning and welcome to LiterARTure. I'm Stacey Goldring.
I'm Cindy Edelman.
Expanding on Dorothy Parker's great quote, in the next hour, we will introduce you to the Bloomsbury Group. They were active primarily between 1904. It's a numbers thing for those of you who know me.
It's in her head. She wishes they still were around.
I certainly do. And the 1940s. This group revolutionized literature, art, intellectual thought, and economics. Their radical ideas on how to live, modernism, feminism, pacifism, and sexuality are now considered today part of the public discourse. That is, if we can keep it. We are thrilled to lead you on this journey, one incredibly dear to us. And our deep appreciation is extended to JU President Tim Cost and First Lady Stephanie Cost, along with Dean Snyder, Assistant Vicki Jones, and the special events team. We also deeply appreciate the underwriting of the beautiful duo John and Julia Taylor.
Amen.
You continue to support literature, a Searching for Identity program, and know that all proceeds from your membership today make it possible for Searching for Identity to continue to empower the children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors to document and tell their stories to combat the growing tide of anti-Semitism worldwide. And from my heart, I tell you, your support grows more meaningful with every single day. Selecting our subject today is a story too long to tell here, but it is sufficient to say that our ambitious girth to share all that we love about Bloomsbury cannot squeeze into our slender time frame together. See,
That's an understatement.
Yeah. Our original oh-so-brilliant idea of Cindy's was discussing...
Of mine? Oh my God. Did you just say that?
Yes. Well, it's been a long week, and it's only Wednesday. I'm just kidding. Okay. Our original oh-so-brilliant idea of discussing not one but two salons this morning meant we'd have to do ruthless editing of information that we love into one presentation. And trust me when I tell you, this led to many sleepless nights, frantic phone conversations, and a little bit neurotic texts happening, mostly originating from my end. I take full credit for that.
True.
So, guessing that many of you may have seen the film Midnight in Paris, or you've read the book, The Autobiography of Alice B. Toklas, which, by the way, is neither an autobiography nor is it written by Alice B. Toklas, we concluded that you may already be familiar with Gertrude
She thinks
Stein.
everyone knows everything about Gertrude Stein. Okay, I mean, let's just get down to the
This is a
bottom.
very savvy crowd, okay? All right. I'm making grand assumptions because I am an eternal optimist.
Right, no, she just knows everything about Virginia
Okay,
Woolf.
moving forward. Thus, we have postponed that subject, we promise, for a future date. And to quote Gertrude Stein, there will be more there. See?
Okay, fine.
Okay. And we promise.
Fine.
Okay, next slide, please. Our spotlight today will shine on perhaps the lesser known, but equally fascinating Bloomsbury Group. These members worked in many fields: the arts, economics, philosophy, history, and politics. Their paintings, writings, theories all happen in West Central London's Bloomsbury and Sussex country homes. Within the walls of Gordon Square to Charleston, this group of close friends supported one another, loving, suffering, writing, painting, criticizing, laughing, wedding, parenting, cheating, and experimenting, and always, always, always pushing the envelope of what it means to lead a meaningful life. It worked for them, and we are the beneficiaries. In this salon, which some critics claim it was not even a group, and others labeled them as cliquey and snobby, nonetheless, they were devoted to one another. They laughed, suffered, wed, parented, they broke and mended hearts, they broke new ground in their fields, they mentally broke down in their minds, they discovered new theories, they critiqued, smoked, and drank, and well, you know what, they were human. To get an understanding of this complicated web of bohemian avant-garde relationships, we have selected to walk in the path of two amazing sisters, the extraordinary artist Vanessa Bell, and that's all one word to me, extraordinary artist Vanessa Bell, and the writer Virginia Woolf, otherwise known as the Marilyn Monroe of literature. That is, if Marilyn Monroe favored cardigans. It is through their lives that you will get a feel for Bloomsbury, their ethos, their lives, their art, their loves, and their lasting influence on us today. And not to worry, we will not hold you here against your will to learn the intimate details of these incredible lives of the inner circle of Bloomsbury. So I want you to relax and enjoy this flight as Cindy transports us in an extremely Bloomsbury way, going back in time to 22 Hyde Park Gate in South Kensington,
Yay.
where we will learn about these two stellar, incredible, powerful sisters, Vanessa and her younger sister, Virginia. And thus begins our first entree into Bloomsbury.
Thank you, Stacey, for that description of the Bloomsbury group. What was it in London's drinking water at 22 Hyde Park Gate in fashionable Kensington that caused two sisters who grew up in a dark, stifling, prim and proper, upper middle class Victorian home to an erudite father and a beautiful nurse caretaker mother to 8 children, what was a combined marriages, to have such unusual lives that completely turned their traditional upbringing upside down, lives that were dedicated to art and beauty, lives that orchestrated a cultural movement called Bloomsbury that continues to intrigue, influence, and inspire us today. Now, it helps to return to the late 19th century photograph on the right side of the screen, where we gaze upon Vanessa Bell and Virginia Woolf's mother, Julia Prinsep Jackson Duckworth Stephen. That's a mouthful, isn't it? In a photo taken by her aunt, the very famous 19th century female photographer, Julia Margaret Cameron. And Julia Margaret Cameron, I can't just say her name and just move right on, unfortunately, sorry. She often shot women in literary or biblical narratives by using a blurred focus. This was a woman who was given a camera at the age of 48 by her children for a Christmas present, and she became this very famous, well-known photographer. And she used a blurred focus, so there's blurriness, which gives the photo a dreamlike quality. Now, to understand the sisters' literary and cultural DNA, their great aunt, which would have been Julia Margaret Cameron, knew and befriended famous writers and poets such as Thomas Carlyle, Charles Dickens, and Alfred Lord Tennyson. They were great friends of the photographer. Now, their mother, Julia Stephen, posed for her aunt 50 times. And in this romantic image of her, we can see where the Stevens girls, Vanessa and Virginia, and their brothers, Toby and Adrian, inherited such elegant features. Not only did Julia Stephen pose for her aunt, but she also posed for the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood artist Edward Bourne-Jones as the Virgin Mary in the painting on the left of the Annunciation. And she was reportedly pregnant with Vanessa when she posed as Mary, which is...
I did not know that. I didn't know that. That's exciting.
All right, are you going to click?
Happily.
Okay, thank you, Madiri. So initially, Julia Stephen was married to a lawyer, a barrister, Herbert Duckworth, but he passed away at a young age and leaving her with 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. Now, turning to nursing and philanthropy, this hardworking widow eventually found Leslie Stephen, who was a widower and had 1 daughter, and he had lost his wife in childbirth. Sir Leslie, as he was later called, grew up in an intellectual family, and the family belonged to a highly cultured circle. He was their father then, the girl's father, Vanessa and Virginia's father, Sir Leslie, was an author, an eminent author. He was an art critic. He was a mountaineer. He was an historian, and he's known for editing the first 26 volumes of the Dictionary of the National Biography. Together, Leslie and Julia became the parents of the 4 more children, Vanessa in 1879, Toby a year later, Virginia in 1882, and Adrian a year after that. Busy lady, and what can we say? Oh good, you're just thinking ahead, thank you. On the right is a rare photo of 4 of the 8 children with their parents, and another couple we don't really need to concentrate on, taken in St. Ives, which is in Cornwall. If you watch Doc Martin, you know the geography of Cornwall, and they would go there for 3 months a year in the summer where they took their summer holidays. And Leslie is the father. He's the one looking kind of, I don't know, kind of
Scary.
Very stoic, very stoic. I try to concentrate on
the women
positive.
don't look so great either, frankly.
And then Julia, the mother, is in the middle with that gigantic hat. Now, on the left of the slide is a modern photo of 22 Hyde Park Gate, and it looks a lot happier than it must have looked as a brick building. It was 7 stories, and at the turn of the century, it would have been completely bricked. Next. Now, this slide here shows us the sisters playing cricket while on summer holiday, and what kind of privileged Victorian home did these girls grow up in? With 8 children in total, it had to be chaos all the time, right? I mean, just complete chaos. Although the Duckworth brothers, and don't forget their names, Stacey will describe them later, they were older and they were sent off to school. The sisters dabbled in art forms as children, and they later maintained that they decided that they were, at an early age, that they knew what they were best in. Vanessa was always making art, and so they decided that she would be an artist when she grew up. And Virginia, who at 5 was writing letters, was going to be a writer, and of course that was actually what happened. And Vanessa had an opportunity to study drawing outside of the home 3 times a week at Arthur Cope's School of Art. Virginia, on the other hand, stayed, quote, home alone, studying her Greek, writing in her diary, borrowing books from her father's huge library, and experimenting with her writing style. So even as young as 5, Virginia Woolf was, writing and trying different styles. Now, this home was very respectable. It was traditional when it came to educating the children. The boys, Toby and Adrian, were shipped off to boarding school and then to their father's alma mater, which was Cambridge. Their mother, Julia, initially taught the girls Latin, French, and history. On a positive note, and I really feel like this is to his credit, even though he looks rather scary, Leslie felt that women should be allowed to be educated in areas other than domestic duties, and he allowed the young girls opportunities to study outside of the home. He said this, quote, "I hate to see so many women's lives wasted simply because they haven't been trained well enough to take an independent interest in any study or to be able to work efficiently at any profession. So later, the girls, the sisters, attended lectures at King's College, London Ladies Department. You know, it sounds like
it's an afterthought. It's like the
like
fifth
Harrods
floor,
had a department.
Yeah, it's like fifth floor lingerie. Yeah.
And also he gave them unrestricted access to his library. Now the next slide is really so wonderful. You see a cozy sofa in a room full of books where her parents are being observed by Virginia Woolf, or Virginia Stephen at the time. She's holding her head with her hand, totally engrossed in what her parents were doing, which of course they were reading. She was a sponge for soaking up people and environments that would later turn up in her essays and books. Woolf's passion for writing was encouraged by her parents, and according to a scholar, Mitchell Liska, Woolf's first surviving diary entry was made in 1897 when she was nearly 15, and she kept these diaries until the end of her life. She kept writing in her diaries till the end of her life. And she kept them, in unlined notebooks with soft covers and bound in colored paper.
That she bound herself, right?
Yeah, that she bound herself. So here's a little more insight into Virginia's incredible, extraordinary intelligence. When she was 15, quote, "Father and I went for a walk along the parade. He told me stories of the historian Thomas Babington Macaulay and various old gentlemen whom he had known. Father recited Matthew Arnold's poem, Sohrab and Rustum, after dinner." And that's this unusual poem about a father and son who fight each other in battle. It doesn't have a happy ending, by the way. "Father did not read after dinner. I managed to finish this just blows my mind. Father did not read after dinner, but I managed to finish the 7th volume of Sir Walter Scott, to begin and finish the 8th volume, and to begin the 9th volume. I mean, come on, who does that? 8 years later, she was translating Sophocles, Homer, Aristotle, and Virgil, and she described it as rather a lazy morning. I read a bit of Latin, the Georgics, stately and melodious, but without the vitality of my dear old Greeks, end quote. There might have been different outcomes for the Stephen family had not tragedy struck in February of 1895 when their beautiful mother became ill with the flu and ultimately passed away a few months later. Their devoted stepsister, Stella Duckworth, became like a mother to them, assuming Stephen's roles of running the household. 2 years later, Stella became sick on her honeymoon, no less, unfortunately, subsequently passing away, forcing 18-year-old Vanessa to put her life on hold and to see her father's every demand while running this huge household and handling her father's enormous grief and depression. Required to take tea with all the proper Victorians, whether they were close to the family or not, who would drop in to share their condolences, the sisters chafed at the domestic duties that were thrust upon them. At the same time, Vanessa was studying painting at the Royal Academy, no less. And by the way, the Royal Academy is still around, and it's still fantastic, where she took art lessons, are you ready, from the American expatriate John Singer Sargent. So she actually studied with Sargent, and I wish I could go. I wish I could talk about it more, but
I could listen all day.
Okay. But she was one of 20 students who had been accepted. After 7 years of caring for their grieving father, Sir Leslie Stephen died of cancer in February of 1904. What happened next?
I could listen to this all day. I have a confession. Vanessa Bell is one of my favorite artists, so this is just the tip of the iceberg. Thank you so much, Cindy. As Cindy so artfully explained, Virginia and Vanessa's brothers, Adrian and Toby, attended Cambridge while the sisters were educated by their parents, tutors, and lecturers. Although the women were not permitted to attend university, they could certainly go to Cambridge and visit their brothers, and indeed they did. It was Leonard Wolf who would later marry Virginia, he recalls meeting Toby's sisters at Cambridge, and this is what he said. They, quote, wore white dresses and large hats with parasols in their hands. Their beauty literally took one's breath away. He was clearly smitten from the get-go. And likewise, Toby's friends made a great impression on these young women. Some of these friends belonged to an elite secret society that still exists today, called the Apostles, and this was a network of intellectuals bound by a rule of secrecy. As described by Bloomsbury historian Francis Spalding, they never gave up their secrets. In fact, one apostle, I just found this out, was interrogated by the MI5 decades later, and he said, nothing, zilch. He would not give anything up about his club.
You were not aware. You had to be tapped, right? I
mean,
they
only accepted 3 members a year, and so there was only a total of whatever that math is if you're at Cambridge, and I don't know. But they only accepted 3 new members every year. I mean, these were brilliant people. You all would have been members. You all would have been members. Everyone here. Member.
Except for us.
So, but fun fact, because we love to connect all this salon things that we are talking about. The original name of the group, founded in 1820, was called the Conversazioni Society, which is my horrible Italian. But we all know where we can translate that back to, which is Baldassare Castiglione.
You just had to say his name once again.
It just feels so good to do that. Okay, so anyways, you can see the connections between salons through history, which is so exciting. I love when that happens. So anyway, Toby also introduces his sisters to his fellow Midnight Society reading group. I mean, they weren't on their phones. They were doing things together with one another. It's so inspirational. Now, if Vanessa and Virginia had lived in the South, this is what I imagine their conversation would be on their way back from Cambridge to Hyde Park Gate. They would have said to one another, "Oh, we found our people." And their attraction, this was not a physical attraction. This was cerebral, which to me is quite sexy, I'm just saying. Okay.
You're already bringing up sex.
We'll get to the sex. But first, you need to know that it were these meetings at Cambridge that formed and planted the seeds for what would later be Bloomsbury. Now, with the death of Vanessa and Virginia's father, these children are left with like an uncertain future. They're not so sure about the inheritance, etc. So the half-brothers, the Duckworths, decide to sell 22 Hyde Park Gate. Now Vanessa, with her older sister Navigation in full force, and we're both older sisters, so we totally get this, she moves all the siblings, Adrian, Virginia, and Toby, out of their gloomy South Kensington home to the unfashionable but cheaper, and albeit middle class, Bloomsbury area of West Central London. And this happens in 1904. So if the Jeopardy question is, the answer is, when did the Bloomsbury group start? 1904, and we all become millionaires.
It's not too far from the British Museum if you've been to London.
Now, we do know that some people like to refer to it as Doomsbury, but we affectionately...
I won't mention any names,
no
but
names
there's someone in the
mentioned.
audience. But
Yes.
anyway,
Okay, so next slide, please. It is here at 46 Gordon Square that Vanessa whitewashes the dark Victorian walls. Those gorgeous black and white photographs taken by her aunt. Vanessa displays these at gallery style in the hall. The furniture is draped with these bold prints and fabrics. There are punches of colors that vibrate against those white walls. You see, conventions were being overturned. The rules of society just kicked out the door. Next slide. The Stevens siblings, who since birth, Cindy said, defied conventions. They were living on the edge. And Virginia wrote, quote, "We were full of experiments and reforms. We were going to do it without table napkins. We were going to paint, have coffee instead of dinner, 9 o'clock. So what was inspiring these sisters to boldly start anew? Settled at 46 Gordon Square, a radical event occurs the following year in '05. Now, despite this era of strict Victorian codes for behavior of men and women, think upstairs, downstairs, Vanessa organizes at-homes. These gatherings include Toby's friends from Cambridge, AKA men. These informal settings, which come to be known as Thursday evenings, attracted some of the greatest minds of all time. And since we're making the rules this morning, Cindy and I deputize ourselves as Vanessa's proxy, and we invite you all great minds, to be a part of the Bloomsbury set. So you come right in with us to 46 Gordon Square, and you get to know these uber elite Apostle Society members from Cambridge, and thus the apostolic tradition comes to influence our friends at Bloomsbury. And with this dawn of a new century, societal change is in the air. The Bloomsbury group discusses progressive ideas, libertarian notions, and sexual freedom, my dear friend, your favorite topic.
My favorite.
And not only did they talk, they walked the walk. They were exploring and experimenting with new ways of living, dressing, loving, writing. They were seeking a new set of principles in which to live their lives. Learning the who's who of the Bloomsbury group is a large order to deliver and to remember. However, before we get to Cindy and the very fun love trials and triangles, you may recognize some of the members, such as author E.M. Forster, who wrote Howard's End, or this happy guy. Who is this man? This is the well-known economist, philosopher, architect of Keynesian economics, John Maynard Keynes, a member of Cambridge's Apostle Society, and of course, our Bloomsbury man. Called Maynard, his ideas fundamentally change the economies of governments and economic policies. And it was more than economics that attracted Maynard to Bloomsbury. Wink, wink, nod, nod. And you will soon meet these two, Maynard and Duncan Grant, the artist, in which Cindy promises to provide all the interesting details, correct?
Whatever you say.
Okay, but PG rated, okay. What's important to know about the Bloomsbury group is that they were all very good friends before they became famous, except maybe for E.M. Forster, but he wrote Passage to India, and I can never forgive him for that because it was so boring. Okay, sadly, in 1906, their brother Toby dies of typhoid fever after a trip abroad. And what happens next is probably by default. You see Vanessa devastated, accepts Clive Bell's hand in marriage, perhaps to fill a void of sadness more than to fulfill her heart's content. The Bells now moved to nearby 29 Fitzroy Square, where, a fun fact, George Bernard Shaw used to live. So back at Gordon Square, Virginia and Adrian remain, putting on their Thursday evenings with the addition of play reading, and then Bloomsbury blooms. I had to do that. So Vanessa establishes Friday evenings, drawing her friends from the Royal Academy and the Slade School of Fine Arts. And their conversations carry the intellectual heft reminiscent of their Cambridge days, and now with women participating. People thought this vile. Influencing their discussions was the impact on Charles Darwin's Origin of the Species, published a few decades prior, and its theory of evolution opened big doors to those big questions. The style of Virginia's writings and Vanessa's artwork reflect the newness. Shaping their stories and art is the philosopher G.E. Moore. You don't have to remember him. And he argued that the meaning of life comes from within, the heart, what is personal, what is meaningful. leaving behind these Victorian, staid, corseted values and calling cards. Forget it. It's all about the private relationships we have with one another. E.M. Forster sums it up for us. Quote, "If I had to choose between betraying my country and betraying my friend, I should hope I have the guts to betray my country." So much for king and country, right? Understanding this philosophy can best be understood by reading Principia Ethica, published in 1903, but I don't recommend you do that. Better, let's just enjoy the meaning of the internal and understanding the private in the works produced by the Bloomsbury authors and artists, and economics as well. Well, this portion of our program, I have appealed to your intellect, and hopefully you've not yet fallen asleep on me. But now comes the good stuff. Cindy will guide us with Vanessa as our North Star through the painterly circles and peculiar love triangles that explains the Bloomsbury Group's constant reinvention and staying power. Cindy.
Thank you, Stacey, for expertly shepherding us through the intellectual and moral avant-garde of the Bloomsburys. In this slide, we see freedom-seeking, free-loving, sexually liberated, pioneering modernist, consummate hostess, radical in all things, founding member of the Bloomsbury Group, 5'7", charmer, artist Vanessa Bell. Ooh, that's a lot to say about her, but we could say more.
Totally worth it.
And her male fan club, all of whom had fallen under her hypnotic spell. One of them, who was not one of her lovers, Lytton Strachey, is having his hair trimmed by her. Was there nothing this woman could not do? Observing this scene, we see several of her ever-evolving cast of men who loved her. Her husband, INO, in name only, Clive Bell, second from left. Her modernist art tutor and former lover, who spent many years trying to just get over her, Roger Fry, he's the first figure on the left. And her longtime love, Duncan Grant. He's the figure whose face we cannot see because it's kind of perched behind Strachey, who's getting his hair cut. Duncan Grant was her partner in all things artistic, the only man she truly ever loved, who had been her brother Adrian's paramour, Anne Maynard Keynes's, and Stephen Tomlin's, the sculptor, and a politician, Arthur Hobhouse, and David Bunny Garnett.
He got around. Whew, he was a very happy man.
Now let's look at the three most important Bloomsburyans. Clive Bell, let's see. Well, can we go? We'll just stay on that one, and then we'll go to the painting. Let's look at the three most important Bloomsburyans. Clive Bell was a pal of Toby Stephen, and he had come to 22 Hyde Park Gate to visit Toby in 1902, and that's when he met Vanessa Bell and developed a crush on her. And the same year, Bell earned a scholarship to go study art in Paris, which is when his love of art really matured. And it turned him into an art critic as well as an author. Now Bell was one of the most fortunate of the Bloomsburys because his father had made a fortune in coal mines, and that enabled him to have a life of ease. And it's important to note that after proposing to Vanessa three times, she finally accepted marrying him in 1907, and she ultimately agreed because after her brother's untimely death from typhoid fever, she was very worried about her financial future.
Both sisters did not want marriage. They didn't want to come out in society. They didn't want to dress the way the women were dressing. They rejected all of it at a very early age.
Yeah, once they were free to do whatever they pleased, it was all bets were off.
They just burned their bras, that was it.
Yeah, so it would be an understatement to say the Stephen Bell marriage was not a traditional one. as the two had so many affairs, and we're not judging, throughout their 50-plus years of marriage, not to mention they hardly ever lived together. They did travel together a lot, but it's revealing that he was always there for her, as she was for him, and they shared 2 sons, Julian and Quentin, and lots of time, as I said, spent traveling. And then she became pregnant by Duncan Grant, her true love. Clive Bell was such an honorable figure, he agreed to give the child his last name. You gotta love these Bloomsburys. Now we go to the next. We're looking at a painting. We're gonna be looking at several paintings by Vanessa Bell throughout her life. This is an early one. It's called Iceland Poppies. Has anybody ever heard that? Judy, have you ever heard of Iceland poppies? They're called Iceland poppies because apparently they're very hardy. But this is a still life that she painted in 1908, 1909, right after she had her first son. And it's painted in this kind of wintry, it sounds a wintry mix. It sounds like, Tim Deegan or something.
It sounds like candy.
Yeah. A wintry palette, a wintry mix, a tonal range of grays and whites. And it appears that she was influenced by Whistler. Now remember, Whistler and Sargent were both expatriates, they're both living in London and exhibiting their work. So she would have, so it makes sense that she drifted to Whistler. And we see these objects in this painting: an antique pharmacist jar, a pale matching bowl, and a green glass bottle that had contained poison. And then, of course, these 3 poppies, 2 white, 1 red. And as you are no doubt all aware, that poppies traditionally symbolize sleep or death and sometimes even rebirth. And it was painted when Vanessa Bell was dealing with her first son, and he was the beneficiary of all her energies, and certainly her husband was MIA. And I know, okay, what was the interruption in their marriage that caused him not to be around? Where was he? And was he seeking shelter from somewhere else? And as it turns out, he was indeed carrying on with Virginia Woolf. Now we know from letters that they took long walks together. They kissed and so forth. He talked about her kisses and such. And we used Frances Spalding, who wrote Vanessa Bell's biography, to base a lot of our work that we're sharing with you. And she said that it was platonic. Well, whatever the case was, it just devastated Vanessa Bell, as you would imagine. And because, if you're thinking that they each had separate reasons for finding solace in one another, you would get an A in art history, AP art history, for analysis. Because for Virginia Woolf was inextricably bound to her older sister. She was her protector. She was always there for her. She was the one who, could handle any issue or any problem for her sister. And she certainly was feeling adrift. And she experienced a sense of real loss here. And Clive, who was also feeling neglected, found an ally in Virginia. And anyway, it was horrific for Vanessa, who became aware but actually never said anything to either her sister or her husband. And that was her way of dealing with her anger and her hurt.
She paints a masterpiece as opposed to getting a good divorce attorney. It's a very positive way to deal.
Well, right. Who would ever think that this was a painting about infidelity, right? Isn't that a sweet little still life? With poison. Well, yeah. And also, what about the colors of the poppies, Stacey?
Well,
what did you learn about this?
Well, when I saw the 3 poppies, I figured, okay, she's got to be the red one who dies off, who dies, and what's left in the bouquet are Virginia and Clive, much taller, much stronger, and it makes it so sad. It's almost like a vanitas, like this is what happens. It's notice me, I had no idea what that word was before I met this one. So thank you, Cindy.
Okay, well, you're welcome. But here's there is a happy ending, somewhat of a happy ending, that this painting was accepted into an art exhibit with John Singer Sargent's work, and Augustus John is another famous British artist, and Duncan Grant. And so Vanessa wrote about this, quote, "So something good has tumbled out of this appalling year," end of quote. Now, the other thing that, of course, when I have a chance to show Piero della Francesca, the 15th century Italian Renaissance giant, I just can't help myself, so please forgive me.
I'm just impressed how you pronounce that so fast. That's very nice.
So this is called the Misericordia Madonna. It's actually in situ at the town hall in Borgo San Sepolcro, which is where Piero della Francesca was from. And reading Frances Spalding, the author compares Vanessa Bell to the Virgin of Mercy. It's so interesting. And so, of course, I had to put it up. And she said that Vanessa was someone who was so forgiving, someone who offered rest, like the Virgin here in the painting, and offered peace to others, someone wise and tolerant like Vanessa Bell. And so it gives us a sense of who she was. And I hope it does give you a sense of the kind of person she was.
I love it because if you are the eldest sibling, you get this. Like you're in charge of all the kittens. That's just what it is. I see shaking heads. So I love this image. It's really beautiful.
And she's good and tall, and those are real people from his hometown.
There's them.
We
adulterous couple. Love the cap.
He did not have faithfulness in his DNA, let's put it that way.
He's clearly very excited to see her. Let's just
come on, Stacey.
Sorry. Okay, moving forward.
One of Vanessa's earliest friendships was with Roger Fry, a brilliant man, totally committed to art, a polymath, and he's seen in the photograph on the left, kind of relaxing in a chair, and in a 1912 they had seen Seurat, and so this is Vanessa Bell's interpretation of pointillism of in a portrait of Roger Bell, and she described it as leopards, her leopard manner. Now, Fry finished his studies in natural sciences at Cambridge. He was also a friend of Toby's, and he promptly left for Italy and France to study art, and he emerged as a, quote, leading scholar in early Italian Renaissance painting, end quote. And I wanted you to understand that because once he sees modernism and once he sees a group of painters that we think are traditional, but obviously post-impressionists in the early 20th century were not seen as traditional. So Fry has a metamorphosis. And Fry is considered Britain's most influential art critic during the first half of the 20th century. He was a painter himself. He was a designer, interior designer. He was an art historian, an author, a curator. He even came to the United States and worked at the Metropolitan Museum, but apparently he got into a row with J.P. Morgan, but we don't really have time to go into that. And he also, interestingly, found a fine arts magazine called the Burlington Magazine, and it's like 122 years old. It's still being published today, which isn't that fantastic?
It is, and you have to say about what happened with J.P. Morgan. He thought he was filling up his own collection as opposed to picking out pieces for the Met, so he got booted.
Well, he got booted. Okay,
yeah.
Okay, fine.
Fine, that's fine.
Okay, fine.
Very good.
Fine.
You want me to change the picture?
What's next?
Okay, carry on. I'll figure it out.
Okay, almost done with him. Now, it's because of Roger Fry that we know the names Cézanne, Gauguin, Van Gogh, or as they say in Amsterdam, Van Gogh, and Seurat. And he literally introduced all of them to the British public in 1910. And so in 1910, not only did he make this art show, which we have this called Manet and the Post-Impressionist located in the Grafton Galleries, which is off Bond Street. But he met Clive Bell in 1910, and they became friends. And that encounter enabled Bell to tag along with Fry to go to Paris, where he met Matisse and Picasso and Leo Stein, and of course, the greatest salon
that
icon.
We're not discussing that salon.
Well, you made me take her photo out, so
I did.
At least I can mention her name.
It was a very rough
day yesterday.
Yes.
A very rough day.
Yes.
Because I had to take out Gertrude Stein and
oh my God, the drama.
And her atelier.
World's tiniest violin. We're going to do
and
a whole
the Picasso
thing.
portrait of her. And I could go on. It's criminal. So anyway, where are we? She was the center of the Parisian
Hold your mic down.
She was the center of the Parisian avant-garde, which the avant-garde in general in the early 20th century. Okay, next, please. I'll move along. Okay, so it was on one of the early trips that Clive Bell collected or bought the very first Picasso that came into a British collection. Are you ready for £4? Yeah, oh my. So I calculated that $685. That would have been for a Picasso on the right, which is the Still Life with a Lemon. And so you can see Cézanne and Picasso's influence in Vanessa's 1912 picture called Landscape with a Building. It shows the palette, it shows the breakdown of space, it shows, she copies the triangle from the Clive Bell, her husband's Picasso. Unfortunately, poor Clive Bell had to sell the Picasso in 1957. I could never find out why. I mean, I didn't think that he ever had any financial
I don't think he did
issues.
either. I don't know.
Okay, next.
Yes, ma'am.
So these are just two examples of the exhibition that was just majorly important to spreading the post-impressionist artists in the public at the time. And these were he used Manet. Now we could talk about Manet, and Manet did not consider himself an impressionist, but okay, he's kind of seen as the father of the avant-garde. I mean, Manet and Cézanne, and then also, of course, you've got the fabulous Van Gogh Pietà. Pietà is the title of a work showing Mary holding her dead son, and he copied this from another 19th century painter, Delacroix. And there's the pamphlet that Vanessa Bell had designed for the show. Now, about the public went bananas over this show. They said it was, all the things you would imagine any avant-garde art did at the time: boring, alien, ordinary, unelevated, without distinction. And
I mean, the identity of the English at the time was you hate the French. Like that was part of your credo. So the idea of bringing this
and they were
here,
all French except for Van Gogh. Okay, can you show the next two, please? She wanted me to cut these out too yesterday.
I did not want you to cut
Lisa,
these out.
Thank goodness for Lisa. She put them back in for me last night. So the portrait of Madame Cézanne, poor long-suffering Madame Cézanne, on the left, said the criticism of her said that she had no female allure. Well, I can promise you, after all the portraits that we know of her, I don't think that was even possible anyway, but they said no female allure to recommend her, and that Matisse's Girl with the Green Eyes was common, even brazen. And, why talk of the sincerity of this rubbish, a critic seized, considered an outrage by members of the press, but it only drove 25,000 people to come see the show. But the worst part was Roger Fry's wife had been institutionalized for a long time, and she was living in an asylum at the time, and it said, Roger Fry, someone wrote this, Roger Fry and his wife Helen, people called him mad and reminded others that his wife was in an asylum. That's how low it went.
I mean, it got very personal and ugly.
So Virginia Woolf would say about the opening of the exhibition, quote, on or about December 10th, human character changed. Now, I need to just do one more and then we'll move along. You're looking at what scholars judge to be Vanessa Bell's best work. It's called A Conversation. It's 3 years she took to paint it. Isn't that an appropriate title for a Bloomsbury painting? And upon first glance, we see three women whose heads are close together, seated in front of an open window with these gorgeous flowers in bloom. And they're definitely getting down to business, right? I mean, you can see, we know now that Vanessa Bell had changed from Whistler to Picasso and in her style, and she had adapted a modernist vocabulary, bold colors, simplified forms and shapes. And she was also, though, she never stopped being a great storyteller. And she fashioned this intimate drama in this image Roger Fry said this about Vanessa Bell. She said that she was someone who could talk to anyone about anything without judgment. Wouldn't that be nice to be able to just live your life without judgment?
I can't imagine that.
My
Can
family
you?
was so judgmental. And we get the sense of the woman on the left with the same green eyes that we just saw in the Matisse. Here, Bell added this entreating gesture on the figure on the left, as if she's coaxing some really intimate detail or like morsel of information from her. It's ironic that that Bell shared with her sister Virginia that quote, that she saw one of the best pictures in the world, and guess what it was? It's another Piero della Francesca. It's like, I promise we won't see him anymore, but this is called the flagellation, and it was in Urbino. I don't know how Vanessa Bell got. They might have gone to Urbino,
They just knew about the Urbino court, just like we all do. Yes, we all remember. Okay.
So she said she thought this was one of the best pictures in the world, and her sister Virginia wrote back, quote, "I think you are a remarkable painter, but I maintain you are into the bargain a satirist, a conveyor of impressions about human life, a short story writer of great wit, and able to bring off a situation in a way that rouses my envy."
Well, Virginia always said painters have a better medium than writers. She always envied that.
Well, so she said, "I wonder if I could write The Three Women in prose." Now, recent scholarship reveals that this work is accepted to have inspired her sister's short story in 1921 called A Society. Please share your thoughts on Virginia.
Oh, that was so beautifully done. Thank you so much, Cindy. When asked to summarize, because she put the emphasis on you must summarize, the importance of Virginia Woolf's work, I must force myself out of a catatonic state. So much scholarship has been done on this woman. I don't even know where to start. Indeed, she truly has been described by scholars as a Marilyn Monroe. But I don't see the likeness either. However, the description is on point, and I'll tell you why. Both the actor and the writer have had their identity usurped. Groups, movements, cultures, words that end in ism, they've all claimed and molded Virginia Woolf to fit into their own narrative or cause or school of thought. And the same will hold true for the future because it's her words, the sentences she builds with them, and the stories that she tells that are evanescent and everlasting. Cindy painted a wonderful picture of Virginia's young life, and we know her love of reading and learning was voracious. So we'll start here with this most iconic of all images of our Virginia. This photograph is elegant, yet she seems like porcelain, doesn't she? So easily broken. And her own image she did not like. She did enjoy a good conversation, and not surprisingly, she was a great storyteller. Her first novel, The Voyage Out, was published in 1915 after she was first able to get some gigs writing for newspapers anonymously, and that was only because she could use her father's name as a calling card. She published Voyage Out after years and years of revision. The irony is that her half-sibling, George Duckworth, was the publisher of this book, and I'm going to ask you to remember that. She marries Leonard Wolf just a few years prior. You know, their first meeting was at Cambridge, and here's a beautiful photo of the happy couple.
Don't look too hard.
From 1915 to 1931, think about what was going on in the world at that time, Virginia proceeded to revolutionize literature as we know it. Her novels broke from traditional storytelling. She embraced stream of consciousness narration. She used fragmented time structures, and she dove deep into the personal and introspection. Now, I am going to attempt to describe how Virginia Woolf does this using her novel, Mrs. Dalloway. And it was published in 25 when Virginia was 43. Several years ago, I tried to read Dalloway. And I got to about page 2, and I thought, what is going on? What is happening? I kept thinking, I don't understand. Nothing is making sense. The book required great concentration from me, but eventually things fell into place. And when it did, well, just let me tell you. See, what I didn't understand, and I'm going to tell you so you'll have a head start, was that Virginia Woolf writes from the perspective of the voices inside of the characters' heads. Okay? That's the action and the plot for her. Certainly influenced by the exploration of the internal and the private, a philosophy that influenced all our Bloomsburians. We understand her stories by the thoughts going on inside the mind. Now, on top of this, she is weaving in time, reminding us all of its constant, relentless march. It's kind of like a memento mori, another term I learned from you. Here's a quote. Big Ben struck. There, out it boomed. First a warning, musical. Then the hour, irrevocable. The leaden circles dissolved into the air. As often as the clock ticks, we are also zipping back and forth through time, past, present, future, to events real and imagined, which means you need to slow way down to read Wolf. And you do not get a warning from these time shifts or the hopping from mind to mind, other than a period, a capital letter that you know it's a full sentence. But you and I, everyone, all of us, we are doing stream of consciousness all the time. We're sitting here right now remembering things from the past or things we have to do in the future. Or why did I say that to that person 2 months ago? Whatever it is, we're all doing that as we are sitting here experiencing the present. But Virginia Woolf is able to capture that with her pen on the printed page. And you should also have it in your head right now. If you're also having questions about what the heck are we saying, save that and we'll answer them later, and maybe we'll do like a post-salon, I don't know. But if you want to know more about Dalloway, because I can't go into it too much more than this next page. I'm sorry.
We started a little late.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. Okay, The End by Stacey Goldring. No, I'm just kidding. I do have an episode on YouTube about Mrs. Dalloway, so that's my shameless promotion, and you can learn all about, and then you don't even have to read the book. How's that? Okay, next slide. Back to Dalloway, you may ask, what is this story about? Simply, it's about a woman. Her name is Clarissa Dalloway. She goes by Mrs. Richard Dalloway, and she's running errands. She's getting ready for a party she's hosting that night. That's it. There it is, right? Susan's shaking her head. That's it. And it is one of the most magnificent books I have ever read. So much happens in that one day. We follow her. We meet her characters in a tag-your-it kind of fashion. Clarissa, let's say, passes 2 working-class girls who witness modern technology and marketing as they look up in the air, and a skywriter of all things is advertising toffee. Reminiscing with an old friend, Clarissa taps into a memory of a first kiss with a girlfriend never to be forgotten. She complains about a car backfiring. That same backfiring is heard as a gunshot on a battlefield, triggering a veteran sitting in a park bench, one that Vanessa recently passed. He interprets this as his friend getting killed in battle. He's agitated. Meanwhile, his wife, a foreigner, an Italian who likes sun, is thinking, what is with this London weather? Later, the simple act of looking at silverware triggers Clarissa to question the basis for her marriage, her identity, her entire life. She gives a glance out the window. She sees an elderly woman across the way looking back at her. A reflection of herself, she thinks, in a few decades. About Clarissa, we read, quote, "She had the oddest sense of being herself invisible, unseen, unknown, there being no more marrying, no more having children, but only this astonishing and rather solemn progress with the rest of them up Bond Street, this being Mrs. Dalloway, not even Clarissa anymore, this being Mrs. Richard Dalloway. The drama in each of the days of our lives, like a painter who balances every color and stroke to create a beautiful canvas, Virginia Woolf weaves together each storyline like an exercise in quantum mechanics, where each story is reverberating off the other and intersecting through the perspective of one woman, Clarissa, simultaneously revealing the universal conditions that connect us all. And it's okay, it's really all right if this does not inspire you to read the book, because you have options. You can watch Vanessa Redgrave portray Mrs. Dalloway in the 1979 film. It's free on YouTube. Or you may recall The Hours by Michael Cunningham. What year did that, do we remember?
2000, no, well, the movie was 2003.
Okay, so 2005, we think the film came out.
No, 2003 it won Best Picture.
Okay, 2003 it won Best Picture, again with the numbers, I'm sorry. Okay. Remember, Michael Cunningham wrote the book, which is his own interpretation of Dalloway, and you'll remember the film because it's the one with Julianne Moore and Meryl Streep, and everyone complained about Nicole Kidman's nose. Next slide, please. Now, more internal insight into Virginia's life. Orlando, published in 1928, was based on her lover, who she met in 1922. The remarkable Vita Sackville West. Written at age 46, the novel follows a protagonist who changes gender across centuries, exploring identity and society's expectations. It was Vita's son, Nigel Nicholson, who later described Orlando as, quote, the longest and most charming love letter in literature, unquote. In addition to her pioneer style of storytelling, Bloomsbury's Virginia Woolf wrote about women's creative independence, liberation, sexual freedom. Today, authors write about this with no social or legal risk. You can read all about this in her A Room of One's Own, published in 1929, where she writes, quote, a woman needs a room of her own and 500 guineas in order to write fiction, unquote. This argument laid the groundwork for feminist literary criticism, influencing Sylvia Plath, the very optimistic Sylvia Plath, and Margaret Atwood. Thank you. We have Virginia's stories to thank. We have Virginia's stories thanks to she and Leonard, who ran their own press. Her artist sister Vanessa creating all the covers you see here, and the authors Chekhov, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky. If they're familiar to you, it's because it was their press, Hogarth, that published the first English translations. If you're familiar with the Oedipal complex, id, ego, superego, that's thanks to Hogarth's translations of Sigmund Freud's work. And it was thanks to her lover, Vida Sackville-West, that her best-selling books kept the Hogarth Press afloat. And I recommend all Vida's titles with great abandon, suggesting you start with All Passion Spent. And in advance, I will say thank you very much. Yes.
Talk about Vida's lineage.
That's my next thing right here. Okay. It's good to know that Vida's family, the Sackville-Wests, their home, their ancestral home, a beautiful estate, was bestowed upon the Sackville-Wests by Elizabeth I. I love these people. Okay. Leonard was always Vida's advocate. His only veto to her was the desire that Virginia had to have children. That, he felt, was something her fragility just couldn't handle. The strong friendships of the Bloomsbury group with them and Leonard and her sister, she was able to become one of the foremost writers of the 20th century. So now I must comment on Virginia's fragility. She suffered from many bouts of depression, breakdowns, hallucinations, beginning at the age of 13. She was sent away and tried suicide several times. The restorative cures for mental traumas that Virginia was forced to endure would today be considered barbaric. Is it any wonder that a dismissive psychiatrist in Mrs. Dalloway is called Dr. Savage? Leonard gave up these traditional methods and decided finally to take care of her himself. What a bold move. He so loved her. Unfortunately, disturbing revelations of childhood indicate her elder half-sister, pictured here, Stella, had to physically protect Virginia and Vanessa from being sexually abused by her older half-brothers, one who published her first book. And after Stella died, they had no more protection. Virginia references this dark chapter in an unfinished memoir called Sketches of the Past, as well as other works. In 1941, with World War II's increasing encroachment on England, she and Leonard form a suicide pact. After all, Leonard was a Jew. At age 59, fearing another breakdown, overwhelmed by the fear of war, her lifelong yoke of depression drowns her, putting a stone in her pocket. Exactly 84 years to the day this coming Friday in 1941, our Virginia walks into the River Ouse, leaving behind a heartbreaking note to Leonard, so beautiful. In it she wrote, quote, "I don't think two people could have been happier than we have been," unquote. Our Virginia transformed storytelling. Her writing style is translucent. Her legacy endures. New generations of readers are constantly rediscovering her. And I know for a fact that our own Jacksonville Elaine Koningsberg had a print of Virginia in her own home. But now that I think about it, clearly it was Elaine Koningsberg who drew this beautiful portrait. Wolf's words would continue to inspire, proving, as she wrote in The Waves, quote, "I am made and remade continually. Different people draw different words from me." She was so prescient. So like the waves she often described, she endures immutable, everlasting, and now to transmit ourselves to our final chapter with Cindy, we will go on a color-rich tour to the ever-expanding world of Bloomsbury's creativity and creative living.
And in the essence of time, I'm just going to flip through some of these. I want you all to see that Roger Fry and Duncan Grant and Vanessa Bell started a workshop called the Omega Workshop in 1913, and they wanted to expand French modernism beyond the canvas and bring it to people's lives. In fact, why don't you?
Yes.
But we're going to go quick. I'm just going to go quickly.
Yes, yes.
No,
yes,
I mean,
yes,
I
yes.
respect
Okay.
people's time.
Okay.
Okay, so keep going, if you would. And this is why we love the art so much, because they were able to translate their creative juices into everyday objects. And Stacey and I had the good fortune of going to a major Vanessa Bell exhibition in Maynard, no, not Maynard, Milton Keynes, England, at the MK Gallery. So keep going. And she snuck some pictures of me, which obviously she put in here. So keep going. And then the other thing that I found really interesting, because I do a lot of needlework, is that they made chair seats, needlepoint chair seats, that Duncan Grant's mother actually used. And I mean, not that she needlepointed. Keep going. And then really the end of our discussion today was going to focus on Charleston House. And Charleston House was a 17th century farmhouse in southeast Sussex. And it was dilapidated. It was a dilapidated farmhouse. It had no electricity. It had no telephone. And water had to be pumped into the house. And it was, we're talking about World War I years. This is 1916. And that was the time when the British government passed a conscription act that said all single men between 18 and 41 were going to be conscripted, and there was, unless they were exempted, but basically the Bloomsbury group men said that they were not, they said they were pacifists and they were not fighting. And so in her inimitable way, Vanessa Bell jumped to action to rent this farmhouse so that Duncan Grant didn't have to go to war. And at the time, Duncan Grant was with David Garnett, his nickname was Bunny. So she was able to get Duncan and Bunny full-time jobs doing manual labor, and that's how they lived during the war.
That's devotion.
Such devotion. And at this particular time, 2 years later, Vanessa became pregnant with her third child, a little girl named Angelica, and by Duncan, who was still with Bunny, at all in this little farmhouse with no running water. I don't know how they did it, but so she saved them from having to go to prison. And it's also where they eventually lived for the rest of their lives. I mean, they had a place in London, but they primarily stayed at Charleston, and Charleston became this laboratory for artistic expression. Why don't you just show part about Duncan and Angelica? You see two different images, black and white photos of Duncan Grant and his daughter Angelica Bell. And when she was born, this is what David Garnett, aka Bunny, said upon seeing this baby. He said, "Its beauty is a remarkable thing. I think of marrying it. When she is 20, I shall be 46. Are you laughing because you know, right? He did. He married her when she was 24 and he was 50. Much to Grant and Bell's horror. I mean, and even John Maynard Keynes got in, inviting her to tea, telling her not to marry him, but she would not listen. And they were married for 25 years. They had 4 daughters, and David Garnett wrote a book about their relationship called Aspects of Love. Has anyone seen that Broadway show? Because Andrew Lloyd Webber turned it into a Broadway show. And sadly, Angelica Bell Garnett wrote a book about her life when she was in her late 60s, and it's called Deceived with Kindness, a Bloomsbury childhood. And in it, she talks about, the gist of it is that Charleston was not a safe place. I mean, obviously not a safe place, but I mean, she was a child. I mean, she saw it from a child's lens.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I'm going to just quickly run through these. We were going to talk about these. So this is the interior of Charleston after Grant and Bell's just they were idiosyncratic. They were so totally in love with colors and, like, for instance, beautiful pieces of fabric that maybe didn't go somewhere, or they didn't have enough to cover a sofa or a chair, well, they used it on the curtains. And so you see here, this is their garden room, which was their living room, and they painted, it's like horror vacui, that expression where there's a fear of empty spaces. That's like what's going on here. And even this fireplace is trompe l'oeil. It's not really a fireplace, but it looks like a fireplace. And anyway, and then look on to the left of the mantle, you see the island poppies were hanging on the wall. Okay, and by the way, there was a mirror inside that frame, but one of the children lit a candle and the glass exploded, and so now there's a beautiful still life in it. Okay, keep going. I'm not going to comment on everything, except that on the left side, on the left wall, you see that Cezanne. I was never able to authenticate whether it was a real Cezanne. It could have been. It's a Mount Saint Victoire, but it just shows how much they loved his work and how important he was to them. And this was the studio. The studio was a former chicken coop, and they raised the roof, and both shared, Duncan and Vanessa originally shared it, and then they went their separate spaces. Oh, and that's Stacey and me at this exhibit that we took a train to. So thank you all for your patience. If we've done our job right, you'll remember Bloomsbury's place in salon life and salon history and its influences on society and our own lives.
We're so honored to bring you the Bloomsbury Group today. As you can see, it is incredibly dear to our hearts, and maybe you'll have learned how it has influenced you and can take a little of that Bloomsbury joie de vivre with you as you leave here today and employ it in your own life. Thank you so much.
Yes,
appreciate
thank you.
it.